I greet you once again, dear students. This is our second video on research strategy, research methods. Our previous video looked at research philosophy, basically guiding you on what approach you are going to take. What approach you may choose to take depending on your research problem. Like I said, all of you are now writing a concept paper in your groups. You have come up with a research problem. You're identifying a research problem and formulating it, and basically articulating it, what it is, and what it is you want to tackle. That is a research problem. Now, after you've identified a research problem and articulated it, you make a decision on how you're going to tackle it, and whether you're going to have a deductive approach or an inductive approach, or combine the two, mix the two to come up with something more holistic, a more holistic answer. So here we are now going to, in this video, we're going to talk about the research methods. So if we go back to the onion we started with, which looked at philosophy, approach, strategy, the time frame, and then the data tools. We are now in the middle of that onion, coming up with a research strategy. So this is what we're going to tackle, and in this slide we have a summary of the research methods that we shall cover. These look quite, it looks like a daunting picture right here. I think almost most of you must be saying, my goodness, what is that? But I first want to calm your hearts. The method you select depends on what it is you want to research. And bear in mind, some methods are unique to IT, and I will make an emphasis on those methods that are unique to IT and that you will most likely use in your research. So let's start with the first one, experiment. And I'll keep going back to our approaches that we discussed earlier. Starting with the term experiment, it's a known term, and I'm sure most of you have heard of the word experiment. You've done it in the laboratories when you are doing your O-level. Some of you might have done it in A-level. If you did biology, maybe you dissected a frog. That was an experiment. Or you turned litmus, you did your tests on litmus papers, putting it in this chemical content, it turns like this. If you put it in this, it turns like that. Those are typical examples of experiments. And it's also research. I'm sure all those scientists who have been working on the COVID-19 virus have been taking it to the labs and testing it to find out how is it affected in this environment. If you give it this drug, what happens? Coming up with the vaccine itself, I'm sure they did a lot of experiments in the labs, and then also on human subjects as well. I'm sure they have also done those experiments. So essentially, this is the classical form of research. This is, I believe, the first research that most people think about when they are thinking about research. Now, essentially, experiment, it requires a selection of samples of individuals from a known population. If we're doing social research or we're doing any research concerning people, then that sample, we determine certain variables, measurable variables. Yeah. There are things that we can measure, there are things we cannot measure. That is one thing we must be aware of. Things that are measurable, things that are not measurable. For example, if I was to take a sample from all of you to find out how many are men, how many are female, those are measurable. What age groups? I would say I have a larger number of this age group than this one. From which school background? How many of you came from universal primary secondary education schools, and how many came from private schools? How many came from religious schools? How many came from public schools? Those are measurable variables. Yeah. So these variables, in other words, become they control other variables in my experiment, because those variables that I select were basically saying, in my experiment, the fact that you're female may affect the result of this thing. The fact that you're male may affect this result. The fact that you come from this school may affect this result. The fact that you come from a religious school may affect this result. That is what we are talking about when we pick out those certain variables, depending on what we want to experiment on. Here I have an example of an experiment, a puzzle solving experiment, where they got two groups of people and they control them. Probably they said we have certain puzzles. We want to give these two groups 4 puzzles, and maybe we set these groups into a certain way. We said maybe we selected IQ, gender, educational background, and so on and so forth, and separated them. And we gave them the same puzzles and the same time. And we even gave them an incentive. Say, how fast can you solve? Or are you able to solve these puzzles? So that is typically a controlled environment. Now, remember, if you go back to deductive approach, we said it is highly controlled. We have a controlled environment. That is one of the key points about quantitative research. It's a key point. Control is key. I might say I gave a questionnaire, the same questionnaire, to a teacher and a student. Now, a teacher is from a different category from a student. Am I sure that the information I'm looking for, the two can give me the same answer? Let us say I'm doing research on Moodle. Now, teachers and students use Moodle, but two different perspectives. For a teacher, I'm coming in to deliver content. You're a student, you're accessing content and maybe carrying out an assignment. Two completely different perspectives. So if I'm asking you questions, I must bear in mind that you're not the same group. First of all, our age groups are different. Our maybe literacy levels, computer literacy levels are different. Our knowledge is different. All of these things are different. So it's not exactly a controlled environment. And the answers I may get may not be the same. As opposed to if I say I'm going to give this group of students, I'm going to give IT students a questionnaire on using Moodle. May be very different from a group of students who are doing education or agriculture. They may be different. They may not see IT the same as you, who are actually becoming IT professionals. So control, this issue of control, a controlled environment is key. That is one thing that we must take note. Going back to deductive approach. Now, you may ask yourself, will I ever use as an IT person? Yes, it's possible, but most likely in the dissertation you're going to do, you will not use the experiment method. We come to our second strategy or method. Yeah, so I'm going to keep using these terms interchangeably. When I say strategy, I'm referring to a method, a specific research method. We come to case study. A case study is quite popular in most research, especially even in IT research. It's a very popular research method. What a researcher does is picks a certain context to examine a phenomena. Picks a certain context to examine a phenomena. I gave you the example of Zivast. Zivast is a system that has been adopted widely. Or let us even come now to Moodle. Let's think of another system, Moodle. Moodle, ever since COVID-19 hit, a number of universities have adopted Moodle. UCU installed Moodle. I think TAM had already adopted it. Cavendish has adopted it. Makerere University has another system, that one I am aware of. I think Kabale University is going to adopt Moodle. So quite a number of universities. This is one system in different contexts. Someone may say, I want to examine Moodle in a private institution, or even more than one private institution. UMU and UCU. UMU and UCU become contexts, your case studies. I want to determine why it was adopted, how it has been adopted, what has been done, what has been the effect, all of these things. So when you want to examine a phenomenon, yeah, in real life, in a real life context, this is when you are using, you adopt the case study research. You may want to develop a system for a particular context. You may say, my intention for my research is to look at cybersecurity in teaching and learning institutions. And therefore, I'm going to pick a context of a university, and specifically Uganda Matters. Uganda Matters University becomes your case study. Yes? And as you're going to ask these questions, the questions of what, why, and how, because you're examining your phenomenon here, you distribute your questionnaires and interviews to your, as a base of observations, interviews, and examine documentation. You put it into your case study and examine it. This is what a case study is. Now, here I'm putting emphasis on it because case study method or approach has been used widely in IT. So it is important you understand the case study research method, because most of you, I'm sure most of you are going to use it. Yeah, are going to use it. Most of the time, case study research is qualitative. Not that you can't do qualitative research in it, but not that you can't do quantitative. You can, but most of the time it is qualitative research, because remember, you're examining something in its real life context. And if I'm examining something in its real life context, I'm looking at everything that affects it, every possible thing that affects it. I'll just give you an example. If I want to if I want to determine why is it universities have adopted Moodle, or how Moodle is surviving in universities, I would look at so many variables. There are so many things I would be looking at. I would look at one, the IT department. Why did they select it? Is it because it's an easy system to set up? What about implications of costs? What are the cost implications as opposed to other systems? Was that the reason why? Ease of use, and all of these things. There'll be many things that I can pick out from a context that otherwise I would not have done if I had, let's say, used the experiment, or had done a survey. I decided to go and just distribute to all universities questionnaires to find out why you have adopted this thing. So essentially, what I'm trying to say is that the phenomenon, if we're looking at, if you want to study something in its real life context, then the case study method is the strategy for you. You can implement all these different techniques. When we talk about questionnaires, interviews, observations, all these are data collection techniques or tools. They are not research methods. They are tools. You can implement them and use them to collect data, but the research method is case study. Our third is grounded theory. Now, grounded theory is the best example for inductive approach. If you go back and think about our inductive approach method, it's the best example. Grounded theory is essentially a method you use when you are developing or coming up with a theory. You generate data for the purpose of coming up with theory. When you look at the term grounded, you may have had terms like groundbreaking research. Hmm? Most of us will barely do groundbreaking research. Our research is built on top of other people's research. But groundbreaking research is basically research which has never been seen before, things that are completely new to what we know as scientists. So one might say COVID is anyone doing research on COVID is groundbreaking. Yes, to a certain extent, it's groundbreaking. But COVID, the coronavirus, is not new to the human, to the scientific world. Coronaviruses exist, only that the variant that came up is much more deadly than the ones that have existed before. And people have been getting COVID before, only that it's a very mild versions that we've been getting, and they don't cause that much harm. What may be groundbreaking is the variant, the new variant, and how we can tackle it. So essentially, when we're looking at grounded theory, we're looking at research that is understanding something for the first time. And the intention is to come up with theory. Yeah? So that's why it's called grounded theory. You're starting to develop a theory. So what is happening is that somebody collects data with the intention of creating or formulating a theoretical framework, an initial theoretical framework. There are many theoretical frameworks that have been developed based on grounded theory. My teaching background, my academic background starts with development studies. And development studies, or some of you may know, development studies concerns that growth of human beings, looking at the human being and bringing that person from poverty into, or from ill-being to well-being. This can be in terms of health, economics, education, political, social status, and so on and so forth. Now, that is an area where so many theories have been developed. If you ask the people in development studies to list for you theories that have been developed to try and bring people out of poverty, there are so many, and many theories have come out, and these are what we refer to as grounded theory. We come to our fourth strategy, which is ethnography. Ethnography is one of my favorites because I personally used it in my research. And basing on my early academic qualifications or endeavors in development studies, it's one of those things, one of those methodologies that truly I love. What is ethnography? Ethnography essentially is also very much rooted in the inductive approach. Basically, a highly qualitative research method. This one looks at trying to interpret the world from the perspective of those experiencing it. Yeah, from the perspective of those experiencing it. And a basic example I can give you, I think we've discussed it before in this class, about female genital mutilation, female circumcision, in other words. There are a lot of research has been done about it, and some of the most groundbreaking research has been based on those people who say, I'm going to go and live with the communities which carry out female circumcision to understand why. What do we mean? A lot of there have been laws that have been enacted, both international and national, essentially stating that female circumcision is illegal. In Uganda, it's another example. Uganda has done it. But year in, year out, we have mothers or even women getting up themselves within a certain community and making a decision, I am going to be circumcised. Now, this act, this particular practice is, first of all, it is highly dangerous. It basically mutilates a woman and causes long-term health effects. Long-term. there is nothing good about it. There is no added value, health value to female genital mutilation. But there's always a question of, why do women keep going back? Why do mothers take their little children to go and undergo this really dehumanizing act? Why do they keep doing it? And researchers made decisions to go and live with communities for a certain X amount of time, and usually it's quite a bit of time, to understand why. To understand why. So this is where this is research truly that says we want to understand from the perspective of those experiencing something. We want to understand from their perspective. Now, you may wonder why me, an IT person, I would love it so much. I actually use this for my research in IT. My particular research, I was trying to understand end users of mobile devices in rural communities. So I had to spend some good time with them, sit with them. I spent a period of about 2 years going for workshops. Whenever they had village meetings, I would go sit with them and simply sit and observe. A few times I had interviews, but that was mostly after sitting down to understand from the perspective of the users how they view their context of health and then coming in to use these devices. So it really took some time. Like I said, it took 2 years, so that is really time consuming. So the research process is also highly flexible. Like I had actually told you before, you change part, you come in believing this, but you have to change this depending on what the context tells you. You change your perspective, you change how you designed something, you change how you interpreted something, what literature said before, you change it. So it's a highly flexible environment, as opposed to, remember when we talked about experiment, where everything is controlled and you're looking for a certain result at the end. So you can already see these are two completely different perspectives. Action research. This is our fifth strategy. So action research was developed very much in the social sciences. It is highly popular in education, but it has also made its way into IT to a certain level, minimum level. Don't worry, I don't think any of you will be using it. But action research is also one of those really, really exciting research methods, because it looks at solving an existing problem. You come into a context, you come up with a solution, put it in the context, then observe. Observe how the context behaves. And the context, which includes users, participants. These participants can come in and change the way things are going. They will say, no, we don't like this solution. It doesn't help. We prefer you change it to this. Then you as the researcher come back, change it, put it back in the context, and the participants then also again tell you whether to change this or to do that. So it becomes a cycle. Here looks like they say action research is spiral. Yeah. So it's a cycle that you go through, changing something, you put it in the context, the participants within the context give you a response, you bring it back, change it, put it back. So the participants or the practitioners or the participants within the context become part and parcel of the research process, because they are affecting the solution that you're bringing in. Yeah. So the focus here is to bring about change. Now, what then becomes the research element? Every time you make a change, you make an observation. That new observation is what you report back to the research community. Yeah. We come to our sixth strategy. Now, just like I pointed out case study research, this is a method which I'm going to emphasize over and over again. And if I'm supervising any of you and I don't see design science in your research and you're developing an artifact, then really you didn't pay attention. Design science research is a research method specifically for IT and computer science fields because it involves innovative artifacts, building of innovative artifacts. So an artifact is, I'm sure you've heard this term, we've had it in artistic terms, sometimes in whatever it is, but it's basically building a tool. This tool can be a system, it can be a model, a framework, whatever it is, but it's an artifact that is going to be used. And all of you are going to build something. We discussed about IT research. We all know we are going to build something at the end of this undergraduate program. So design science is a research method you all must use, and it must appear in your research methodology chapter. It must appear. It is your primary research method. Why? Because you're going to build an artifact, an innovative artifact. Yes? The design science research method has several steps which are outlined. Yeah. So the first is the first hunch, where the person carrying out the innovation has an initial idea of what they want to do, the artifact they want to build. So one might say, I want to build a student information system. Another person will want to say, I want to build a cybersecurity solution. Yes, for end users. You may say, I'm going to focus on end users, or you might want to build a cybersecurity solution for the back end. Whatever it is, you're building an artifact, you're building a solution. So you have an initial idea and you have your set goals. Doesn't this sound like our concept paper or first proposal? I think so. Then we come up with the requirements and assumptions. So from the goals, we define our requirements and assumptions. Then we come up with structure specifications or characteristics. So this is the design process, the design part. Then you come up with your prototype, implement it, and evaluate. This is typically the process in IT and computer science students. We come to our seventh strategy. I hope you can all hear me. It's raining heavily outside. We come to our seventh research method, which is action design science. We've seen action research and also seen design science. Now, there is a researcher, there are some researchers, especially CN. They say when they look at design science, they say design science doesn't really involve the context. So they say, let us combine this method with action research. So they say, here the scientist designs an artifact, puts it in the context, and once he has put it in the context, determines the validity of the context, then switches, then makes changes based on the practitioners and changing part. So this is also another method can be used by IT students. Our fifth is cross-sectional and longitudinal research or study. So these ones are time-bound. Yes? They are time-bound. Cross-sectional, basically somebody saying, I'm going to take a snapshot of a certain period and use that and collect information from that period. For example, somebody will say, I want to see how students have adopted Moodle from the time they were trained from the beginning of semester to the end of the semester. That is a cross-sectional research. Another person will say, I want to see the student study, but this will take time. Someone will say, using ICT or e-learning from the time of ICT was introduced up to 2021. That is longitudinal. yes, clearly, and the real accommodate will find a certain situation of problems within a certain context, and then you pause back. Most of you want to do this, our last one is that many of you want to, none of you will do this, for sure will do this. So the survey kind of is normally done by institutions like the Uganda PhD. This carry out large scale, collect large amounts of data from a huge size of the population to understand science. Normally they will use questionnaires. If they don't, they will use highly structured interviews. So when you look at these, you realize these are highly quantitative or deductive types of research. So far, when we look at all that we have done, all that we have seen, we can already pick out which methods are deductive, which are inductive. Which methods are deductive, which methods are inductive. And which methods we can use as IT professionals. So attached to this section is a piece of work done by Olafin and Myers. There was a research they did in the United States. This read through each chapter. Try to identify what their research project was. What other research has been done, may be done by others, what gaps did they identify, how they solve